Pre-order my book, American Evil, in the description below. I know I said I wasn't going to be making any videos for the foreseeable future, but I thought I owed it to you guys to kind of take a step back and explain why, what's been going on, what I'm doing in my personal life. And essentially, what it amounts to is that I am in a very, very, very good position, right? I'm doing everything right, and everything's working out for me. And things are going so well that I don't really have time to play video games anymore, right? So for me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense like running a video game channel when I maybe play a game like 2 or 3 times a week, right? And I've been making it work because there's not a whole lot I want to play anyway. Uh, you know, I got through Tears of the Kingdom just fine. If something comes out that I really really want to play, I'll set the time aside and play it. But the thing that's been like changing quite a lot over the past couple of years, and this is not a recent thing, this has been a trend since 10 years back. Uh, I'm not willing to sit down and play through every single game that comes out just so I can like trash on it. Right? Back in the day, I would like buy Assassin's Creed 3, make fun of like all the crazy, ridiculous, like historical inaccuracies, like the mediocre gameplay, like the plot decisions, the graphics, the bugs, right? I would do that, and then I would make a video complaining about it. Like I used to have a very, very, very well fleshed out knowledge of most major PlayStation 3 franchises and every Nintendo franchise. And these days, it's limited mostly to Nintendo, right? And of course, I've been like playing a little bit more PC, right? But like again, I don't know as much about video games as I used to, right? And as a result of that, like because of where I am right now, it's one of those things where I'm just like, I don't want to continue with what I've been doing in this sense, where I'm just sitting here like complaining about every game that came out, right? If it wasn't for the hype cycle around Helldivers 2, Power World, and Baldur's Gate 3, I probably wouldn't have talked about them at all. And that's another thing too, is that like the Nintendo hate community that was so prevalent like 10 years ago, every major YouTuber hated Nintendo, right? Right. Even though we're allegedly Nintendo fans like GameXplain, right? They were always coming out like trashing every new Nintendo game, every new Nintendo console, every new announcement, every new direct, right? Like it was a constant stream of negative for a really, really, really long time. And then over the past 10 years, there was a gradual shift in which that like the YouTubers that people used to worship and like take at face value as like the voices of reason in the industry, like the voice in regards to like what is and what quality, more and more of these people are like starting to expose themselves because of how ridiculous and petty they are, right? I talked a little bit about like how Andre Segers complained about like Super Mario Bros. Wonder, right? Like, oh, the only reason people liked it is because it wasn't as bad as New Super Mario Bros. I've talked about like Sean Malmstrom's autism in regards to like NES, Zelda, and Mario, and his complete hatred for everything that came out after that. I've talked about like the BitBlock, Arlo. The list goes on and on. Review Tech USA, right? Like I've talked a lot about these people, but the reality of the situation is these people are becoming increasingly irrelevant in the new decade, and I, getting old, being older now, don't necessarily feel that it's in my best interest to continue because everyone that's older than me is falling off, and everyone younger than me isn't relevant and isn't never going to have like the same audience and pool that the old guard did, right? You can kind of see this with the Mish, right? About a guy about 20 years younger than Review Tech USA, right? Demish actually plays the games, right? He actually has like opinions, right? He actually has an idea what he likes and doesn't like. And like, yeah, a lot of his videos are cringe and he's a complete sped, but at the same time, like, uh, it's it's not as terrible as what we used to get. And as a result of that, like because it's higher quality, it doesn't pull in the same kind of like um, ridiculous clickbait nonsense that we're used to seeing, right? Someone like Review Tech USA would contradict himself like day after day, like making videos about how like oh, this is good, good is bad. Oh, Nintendo. Like, you don't really with like the new wave of YouTubers because they would not be able to get away with it. The new wave of YouTube content consumers are a lot more and are a lot more willing to call out YouTubers on their nonsense. I feel right like we saw like these absolute titans of the gaming industry sphere just fall off. People like AVGN, people like Spoonie, Boogie, like the list goes on and on and on. And what that comes down to really, I do not and never had any intention of like replacing these people, right? I never had any intention of becoming a gaming YouTuber. And I'm not going to be, is kind of the realization I've made over the past several weeks. Actually, it's been longer than that. But, even now that I'm making money on YouTube, right? Even now that like people watch my content and they know who I am, and I make all these great videos that people really enjoy. I predicted the downfall of Power World and like the failure of Baldur's Gate 3 and like the downfall of PlayStation, 10 years ago. Like before PlayStation 4 was even out, I was talking about how PlayStation was on the way out, right? Like, I saw this stuff coming, right? Um I don't feel as if I personally am invested enough in the community to continue making those kind of predictions anymore. Like the way it looks now to me is that like Nintendo has won the console war and people are coping and seething about it. Like making up some weird stuff about like mobile PC and like the power of the cloud will destroy Nintendo this time, right? Like you have all these issues with the gaming sphere, right? You have like Gamergate and you have like the declining third party studios. Like you have all these real issues with video games, and yet inexplicably you have no one willing to call out the obvious, is that like Nintendo did everything right. Sony and Microsoft are going out of business because their hardware divisions were poorly managed. Nintendo doesn't have that problem. And yet you see people just falling over all over themselves trying to say that like, oh, Xbox and PlayStation failed because they were consoles, and consoles are irrelevant in this day and age, which is not true at all, considering the success and popularity of the Switch, right? Again, like the narrative has always been that Nintendo is bad and everything else is good, right? And it's crazy how even now that narrative persists somewhat. Right. The idea that like the cloud is going to replace Nintendo hardware is just retarded because if you think about it, like what are you going to play your cloud games on? You know? Like all Nintendo has to do is just keep their console, their software tied to their hardware, and they're good. People are going to pick it up. Right? Like the days of people like picking up alternative hardware for products that really should be on Nintendo, stuff like Resident Evil, stuff like Final Fantasy, like those days are over. Is what we're seeing. Like it's becoming harder and harder to justify not supporting Nintendo hardware, and yet you're still seeing people like try and like throw out wild claims about how like Nintendo doesn't appeal to their demographic, or Nintendo doesn't like have enough horsepower to run that. Like how many people have we seen like who claim that Switch couldn't run Persona 5 or Nier Automata, right? Or or Arkham Knight, which all of which now runs flawlessly on the console, and now we have confirmation that new hardware is coming. So it's going to be a weird situation in the future, seeing what the excuses become, but like the excuses have already started, right? We know nothing about the hardware. We know nothing about the next generation of Nintendo hardware, and yet we're seeing the same energy that we saw from like 2017 3DS, right? Where like, the new console's out, people are hyped for it, it's getting all these games, and immediately people start crying about how the old platform is dead. Oh, Nintendo needs to stop releasing new games for the 3DS. They have to put Samus Returns, WarioWare Gold, uh, uh, Ever Oasis on the Switch. Otherwise, they are doomed to failure, right? That was a real narrative at the time. That like Nintendo should have put the 3DS out to pasture. They should have gone out and shot it in the head like Old Yeller. But no, like the 3DS stayed very relevant for years after the Switch came out. It was something that like people were in denial about and they complained about incessantly for no reason. But like the 3DS was huge. Okay. And now we're seeing the same thing with the Switch, right? We're in 2024 now. What is it, like 7 years in? Over 7 years in. People are saying that like nothing good has come out on the Switch this year, like ignoring all the great titles, ignoring Unicorn Overlord, ignoring Princess Peach Showtime, ignoring everything else that's coming out, Endless Ocean, right? There are games confirmed for 2025 for Nintendo Switch. And yet you see a lot of people coming out doing the same tired dance where like, oh, I hope Nintendo is going to have games for their new console. Oh, there's nothing new coming out on the Switch. I hope this new Direct has nothing to show so Nintendo can wow us all with the Switch with the next console announcement. It is absurd. Okay, it is the exact same behavior we've learned to expect from these people over the past several years. And for me personally, I don't think I want to go through it again. Like for me, I feel like I took an epic W with the Switch, right? Because I was telling everyone during the Wii U years is that like, oh yeah, Nintendo's winning the console war, blah blah blah, and like nobody took me seriously, right? Throughout that entire generation, and then like I was proven right in the Switch generation, and everybody just tried to like write it off as a fluke, right? How many times have you heard people try to say that like, oh, Switch doesn't count because they had to merge their failing console division with their handheld division, and it's just that's not how this works, buddy. Like it was to me like pretty blatant just how like this entire generation we've seen these people like bend over backwards trying to downplay Nintendo Switch success, right? Breath of the Wild to this day is one of the best games ever made, and yet you still have like quite a few people who refuse to admit it. Tears of the Kingdom, right? They threw everything they had at Tears of the Kingdom trying to downplay it. And yet at the end of the day, a year later, people are still talking about playing that, not Baldur's Gate 3. They tried downplaying Pokemon Legends Arceus, like Fire Emblem Engage, like the list goes on and on and on, right? Like No More Heroes 3, Bayonetta 3, like the reality is, I think, is that like the Pretendo community is on the way out. Is my genuine, honest feelings on this, and that's been true for a long time. But like, I do think it's not going to survive another console generation because the people who are like really dead set on hating Nintendo no matter what, the people who grew up in the Sega Genesis and PlayStation 1 eras, like those guys are older now. Like these guys are like dying. Like I'm not exaggerating. This has been something that's I've noticed too is that like the people who have been like major spearheads in anti-Nintendo rhetoric, people like Sean Malmstrom, people like Boogie, like these guys are not in the best of health, right? And they aren't gonna live much longer. Like Sean Malmstrom has straight up confirmed on his blog that he's been given like a death sentence, right? Like this disease he has like took 10 years off his life supposedly, and he's in his 40s. So like looking at what happened to him, looking what's happening to Boogie, Wings, DSP, like I really don't want that for myself. All right, I don't want to grift off like the anti-woke community, like Stuttering Craig and Melanie Mack either. Like I want to put out good, high quality content. Is what it all comes down to, and I just don't see that coming out of YouTube anymore. Right? Like I just have nothing more to contribute. Is my genuine, honest feelings about this at this stage. Like, yeah, Nintendo won. Like they're the best. Like, yeah, okay, we've been building up this moment for like 10 years. Okay. Now it's time to move on to something else, right? Like again, I'm focused on like the next stage of my life right now. So it's like I don't even really want to like revel in my victory, right? Like people weren't even willing to admit that I had a victory, right? How many times have you seen over the past several years have you seen people like attack me, like call me insane for pointing out that Nintendo is successful, right? Like it's just it never really ends. And the more I interact with these people, the more I realize just how delusional and out of touch with reality they really are. Honestly, like there isn't going to be like any convincing these people. These are true religious zealots, right? They genuinely believe that Nintendo is the devil and that like Gaben is going to like take the PC ports and like the PlayStation 4 ports on Steam and just like save us all like from like microtransactions or whatever. Like I don't know what they believe, but like it's it's getting really old, right? Seeing people like get hyped over like just mid products like Nikke, like Stellar Blade, like Horizon Mini Eons, like like a Dragon Infinite, right? Tekken 8, right? Like we've had so many disasters this year, right? Alone, right? Just look at like Power World. Just just look at Helldivers 2. Like just look at every like all this insane nonsense that's happened and think to yourself, Harmon Smith didn't have to go through any of that. Harmon Smith was out on his bike, going outside, doing things. He wasn't like Grums, like sitting on Twitter, like angrily tweeting, "Free Stellar Blade in." Like he wasn't trying to convince people that Nikke was anything other than Coomer bait, right? He wasn't trying to like tell you that like even Nintendo is doing it when it comes to like censorship, when it comes to microtransactions, battle passes, because it wasn't true, right? It was never true. For the past 10 years, I have watched Nintendo, well, longer than that. For the past 20 years, I have watched Nintendo dominate this gaming industry. I have seen them put out the greatest games ever made over and over and over and over again, and you guys just stood there and spit on them the entire time, right? Even now you're doing that. It's just like, how can you be so devoted to hating a video game company is kind of my mindset on this. Like it really is your entire life is my genuine opinion on this. Like this is all you care about is making sure that Nintendo fails and everyone knows it, right? Like just look at how like certain individuals reacted to Baldur's Gate 3 winning quote quotation mark the game award at the VGAs, right? The game award show that I will never watch or support again. Like just see at how people reacted to that. Like people weren't happy about Baldur's Gate 3 winning because nobody played or bought it. Like they were happy about Zelda losing, right? Like that's the reality of the situation. And now that we're like 6 months after the fact, right? It's crazy just seeing like just see Zelda continue to be played and talked about while Baldur's Gate 3 has already been forgotten. When I look back on Baldur's Gate 3, like I thought it was going to be like a solid 5 years of like people hyping up this game. But in reality, like it didn't even last that. Like this was no like it's always been sad to see the games that people latch onto as masterpieces, right? The Nier Automatas, the Persona 5s, the Bloodborns, right? Like again, it's so sad and pathetic to see people like pretend these games can compete with Nintendo, right? It's just like, why even bother, right? I've played Persona 5 now. I've played Nier Automata now. I've played Horizon Zero Dawn now. And I can tell you that I gained absolutely nothing by playing these games, is my genuine, honest opinions. Like, at the end of the day, I would rather do something else,